Good morning, Pamela.
So discomforting to hear a perfect stranger use my first name. Mrs. Travers, please.
I do apologize, Mrs. Travers. I'm Don DeGrady, the scriptwriter.
Co-scriptwriter? I shall certainly be having my say, Mr.
DeGrady. Wonderful. I welcome your input.
If indeed we ever sign off on the script.
Right. This is the rest of your team. This is Dick and Bob Sherman, music and lyrics voice, the one and only Mrs. P.L. Travers, the creator of our beloved Mary.
Poppins.
Who else?
Mary Poppins. Never ever just Mary.
That was a clip from Saving Mr.Banks. We're very glad to be joined by Emma Thompson. Emma, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Mark.
I very rarely start an interview by saying this, but I just loved Saving Mr. Banks to pieces. Everything about it. It was one of those films I was watching it thinking, they've made this specially for me. Partly because, you know, I'm a huge fan of yours anyway. Mary Poppins is one of my 10 favourite films of all time, and I must have watched it, you know, a couple of hundred times. How daunting was it to go anywhere near Mary Poppins, since so many people hold it with such affection?
Oh, well, the thing is, it's not going near the film so much. You don't see the film. You don't. You're not on set with Dick and Julie working behind you and doing. But I don't like what Julie Andrews is doing in that scene behind me. It's not that kind of film, and it's about someone who no one knows anything about. I mean, I ask around a lot. I say, you know, P.L. Travers, what do you think of her? What? Nobody say, who? What? Who? Mary Poppins, the person that she created, is, of course, known by absolutely everyone.
So how do you go about constructing a character about which so little is known?
Well, there's a lot of material. There's a lot of her writing. There's documentaries, there's biography material. There are indeed people who yet live who knew her. Mm-hmm. So I just went to all of that. There's an awful lot of source material, actually. The difficulty is that she's full of contradictions. She's an incredibly contradictory character. So it was trying to build exactly the version of her that was right somehow for this movie. That was the challenge.
And the film deals with the fact that she was famously very, very reticent about allowing Poppins to be taken away from her and have anything done to her at all.
Yeah.
And the film reaches some form of resolution about that. How do you feel that Travis did in the end feel about what happened to her vision on screen?
She didn't like it. She really didn't like it. She didn't understand about film. And she was snobby about it. Yeah. She was a poet. She was someone who thought that theatre and the arts did not include film. And indeed, in those days, there was quite a lot of that about. Mm-hmm. It's all changed now. It's very interesting how that's changed. But she went up to Walt Disney at the party and she said, well, the characters, I mean, their cartoons will, of course, have to go. And Walt Disney said, Pam, the ship has sailed. And that was it. I mean, one of the best things about making this movie was meeting Dick Sherman, who'd written the score. Yeah. This beautiful man who, for some reason or other, is filled with light. And that score is a work of greatness, actually. Those songs go into you in some core way. And he said, I hated her. She was horrible to us, horrible. And I wish I'd known. And he cries about it because he says, now I know why. But of course, there's no excuse for that kind of behaviour. That's why I loved playing her so much.
I did a series of concerts with the CBSO in which we played, you know, my favourite music from films, and we played the overture from Mary Poppins. And of course, at the end of it, there's not a dry eye in the house. And one of the interesting things about the film is it does show you that it's the songs that soften Travers, because there is the moment when she suddenly says yes, and she actually gets up and starts dancing.
Yes, exactly. That song, Let's Go Fly a Kite, is a very interesting song. I think, you know, think about in the history of music, about which I know next to nothing, but I do know that the chord D minor was considered of the devil. And I think that there are some chords you think that comes from a very dark place. And when I say dark, in a vital kind of the human consciousness, the collective consciousness. And I think Let's Go Fly a Kite, for some reason or other, resonates inside all human beings and is the most extraordinary lift of the spirits. We had to listen to that song hundreds and hundreds of times, and not one of us got fed up with it. It was very bizarre. It's got a great power, and it makes you cry. what is that?
Did you read the novels yourself before you saw the film of Mary Poppins?
Yes, I did. And it's interesting because as she got older, they become more and more abstruse and strange because she was becoming very interested in all these myths from different cultures. She followed Gurdjieff, she followed Krishnamurti. I mean, personally, she followed them. She knew Yeats. She was very close friends with George Russell, the great Irish philosopher-poet. She loved men, older often and very clever or very, very creative. And I think she was constantly looking for the part of her father that happened during his alcoholism, before he started drinking and before the moment where the drink had taken him away from her. The middle bit in a drinking man's, who's a creative, charismatic expression, which is unforgettable and second to nothing because it's magical, because it's a combination of a drug that can unlock the creative passion and make it extraordinary just for a moment before it spoils, before it all goes horribly wrong. And you looking for that again and again and again, if you don't find it in another alcoholic, you're likely to look for it in a guru.
What about the relationship between her and Walt Disney as portrayed between you and Tom Hanks? It's a very difficult relationship to play because at the beginning it's so frosty and and yet during the course of the movie she doesn't soften exactly, but they do develop. What do they develop?
I think what happens is Walt expected her, as he expected everyone, because generally speaking it happened, to come and just be utterly delighted and charmed. And when that didn't happen, his attitude changed completely. And he tried to deal with it. She, in her turn, was enjoying the power that she had over him. So I think that in our story, what happens is a certain meeting of power between two people who agree to come to an accommodation. It's two huge forces. I mean, he's a behemoth, with a corporation behind him, and she's just a very, very determined woman in a good pair of shoes.
Where do you stand on that whole behemoth? There's the wonderful scene in which he says, you must come to Disneyland. And she's like, the very thought. And he said, well, who wouldn't want to go to Disneyland with Walt Disney? Where do you stand on Disneyland?
My dad took me when I was 16, and of course I was fascinated by it, and I loved the experience. It was the old Disneyland, and there were people in white kept on picking up anything you dropped down, and the loos were called the restrooms, which my father took enormous exception to. He said, but I don't want to have a rest, I want to have a pee. Why do they do that? They've sanitised everything. So he alerted me to the sanitisation. I was young enough to think, oh, this recreation of the universe is a good thing,
Yeah.
And he said, well, it's a little odd, isn't it? But you understand why he did it, Walt. You understand why they all do it, authors like that and creators of new worlds, because they're just trying to heal the place where they were most damaged.
And of course, your father similarly created these extraordinary children's visions. I could recite the whole of Dougal and the Blue Cat off by heart, from beginning to end, and if pressed, I will do it.
You have to come over and do that.
No, and I'm not being
Buxton.
funny. I can literally do the whole thing.
I'm Fenella Fielding.
Yeah. In fact, once when I was doing the Radio 1 film show and my co-host was off, they said, if you could have anyone, who would you have? And I had Fenella Fielding because I wanted to do a scene from Dougal and the Blue Cat with her.
Oh, Mark, that's hysterical.
But did that in any way sort of, prepare you for that growing up with... Because there is a Walt Disney comparison with that, isn't there?
Well, there's a connection, certainly. The connection is more actually with P.L. Travers and with other children's authors like Beatrix Potter.
Yeah.
And with this thing, particularly, P.L. Travers said one thing that my father always said, which was, I don't write for children. Why would I do that? Dad always said children are just people who haven't lived as long as we have. Why do we speak to them in a different language? It's patronising. So he would always talk to babies in prams completely normally, like I'm talking to you. And it was much appreciated, actually. I'm not sure whether it was appreciated by the babies. I did not ascertain that. I was probably a baby at the time. But he never did do that. It was not in his character to do that. at all. So the darkness or the grown-upness of it, that's a real connection, I think. And Nanny McPhee, I didn't write Nanny McPhee for children, specifically, not at all.
I mean, I have a similar relationship with Nanny McPhee in that I have watched Nanny McPhee with my kids on a hard rotation. I mean, my daughter grew up with Mary Poppins and then graduated to Nanny McPhee. So, and we've always seen them as very much, a pair.
Yeah, they're sort of bookends in a way, aren't they? And there's another weird connection, is that when I was doing the publicity for the first Nanny, I said one of the things that inspired me about her was that she was like a Zen master. And when I started doing the investigations into P.L. Travers, that's exactly what she said about Mary Poppins. And I thought, the nanny is the female version of the outlaw, the sheriff. Because women traditionally were locked into domestic environments, that's where they wielded their power. We've made this myth, our Westerns, women weren't allowed to get on horses and run into town with guns and sort things out. So we've put our myth, that version of our myth, into the nursery. It's fascinating. And of course, into the nursery with the most valuable things in our lives, our children.
It's become a standing joke in my house. If anyone's in a room and you don't notice, they say, "I did knock." Because you've got so many other irons in the fire at the moment, you have a number of other films coming out. Tell us about what's happened with Effie. Is that all sorted now? There was a lawsuit problem.
There was a lawsuit, yes, but that all got sorted out. But we don't know what's happening because one of those artistic schisms that sometimes occurs is we just don't know because it's not with us anymore. So hopefully at some point people will see it. And what else?
Love Punch?
Love Punch comes out next year.
Can you tell me about it?
That's the merriest film. It was one of those films that was a joy to make, and we made in the spirit of making a film that makes you feel happy from beginning to end, which nobody does anymore. So it's quite old-fashioned in that sense. It's a romantic comedy caper in the traditional sense of that phrase. Me and Pierce Brosnan.
And Paddington Bear?
I just did help. I mean, I literally came up and put my hand to wonderful Paul King's back. I mean, he's written it, and I just did a little bit of work with him on it. So that was a lovely job.
When you say that thing about people have forgotten how to make movies that just make us happy, I started watching Saving Mr. Banks. I started crying about sort of 10, and I love a good cry in the cinema more than anything. But I thought one of the things that was most charming about it was that it wasn't in any way. I mean, there's the darkness is all in there, and the conflict, but it wasn't in any way embarrassed about wanting to make you happy, and I came out of it feeling that actually, if Mary Poppins the film makes sense to you, that Saving Mr. Banks would. And I was very worried beforehand because that's why I said at the beginning, you go anywhere near Mary Poppins, it's like going near a sacred text. Has the film turned out how you wanted it to turn out?
Oh yes. I think John Lee Hancock's done something very clever because he had to balance three big plates: Pamela Travers, Walt Disney, and Australia. People we don't know, Laura. And the way he does balance those plates seems to me to be very skillful, because just when you think, oh, it's going to fall off, he goes back and brings it up to speed again, and you're carried through. It just works. It's one of those movies. I haven't seen one for quite a long time that has so much in it. It's yes, it's got main characters, but it's also an ensemble because there are other actors. I mean, Bradley Whitford and Paul Giamatti, and they're just everyone gave their best to this script, and it's so fantastic that the Disney Corporation made it. This script, it cost less than the second Nanny to make. Yeah. This is a mid-range movie that no studios are making anymore, and good on Disney for doing it, and may they do it again.
Let me ask you one last thing. Were you really down to do the lead in Basic Instinct?
No, of course I wasn't. I was absolutely unknown. I went to see Paul Verhoeven, who said...
who's very nice.
Yes, I'm not... Yes, I'm sure he is. But anyway, he said to me... He said when he told me I hadn't got anything remotely... He said, the trouble is if you are falling between two stools. And when I saw the film, I thought, yes, that's very accurate. And I think, gosh... Blimey, which stools, Paul? Blimey. Oh, Good grief. Anyway, yes, of old ancient history.
Emma Thompson, it has been a real pleasure. I loved Saving Mr. Banks, and it's been a thrill to meet you.
Thanks, Mark. Thanks.
Thank you.